So Matt and Robert turned up in Chris's office Christmas Eve, and Serena says to them, I have no idea how you got this meeting, this better be good, because we all want to go home. And that was the first meeting where we went and pitched and said we want to build this business consultancy business. Are you interested? I get this call from the new CEO who's only been in the job 3 months. It's like, what the hell is this new brand that has just been announced? We're trying to have less brands, not more brands. And Matt finally remembered that he knew someone quite senior in the bank. At about 11 p.m. on a Friday night in the viaduct, and he's in Auckland. He goes, oh, I know who I can call. And so he texts this guy, and he goes, oh yeah, I'll do breakfast with you tomorrow. It's like, well, why didn't we think of this a week ago? But okay, we're having it now. And so we kind of gave a pretty verbal sales pitch, and it was a refreshing thing to go sit in a room of people, tell them about what you'd built, the kind of customers you worked with, and these guys were like salivating in the mouth going, love this. This is just fantastic. We absolutely want this. I felt that we built a tier one kind of consulting business without a kind of tier one brand. And so the first thing he said is, okay, so what are you really buying? And he said, don't tell me you're buying people because they're a liability. So it's like, what are you really buying here? And then he's like, and then my second piece of advice is,
Today on the show is Justin Hamilton. It's a fascinating conversation on how you can end up owning and exiting a business through a non-traditional path to foundership. He and his co-founders approached Spark to start a new division and eventually became the largest and most successful consulting company in New Zealand in that space. They actually went on to global acclaim. They then did a management buyout of that company and ultimately took it through to a successful exit. Many lessons in here on building a fascinating and unique culture, how to maintain independence under a big brand, and also how to navigate this choppy waters of building a business and exiting it ultimately. Stick around, it's a great episode. Justin Hamilton, so great to have you here. Welcome to the show.
thanks, Josh. It's nice to be here.
Hey, so the consulting confession kind of relayed to us that you never really desired a career as a consultant. Yet, you built one of New Zealand's most successful technology consulting practices. So was there ever a time that you found yourself kind of uttering a consulting cliche and thought to myself, what the hell am I doing here?
Yeah, I think I still find that today. I think, probably the two words that I hate the most would be leverage and kind of synergies. And leverage is a hard word to replace would be my view, but they're certainly the top of my vocab. And I kind of, particularly talking to smaller organizations, trying to stop myself and find another way of saying what I'm trying to say, because it definitely feels like I'm coming across like the classic consultant.
Yeah. Leverage is such an interesting word, isn't it? Because it has connotations in so many different spaces.
Yes.
And it's a vital thing to be able to have. I think about leverage from a skills leverage standpoint, like the way that you can identify your critical skills and then utilize those in a space which is really appropriate. So that gives you leverage. And then the other is the financial leverage. So in other words, using your capital, as I talk about, I own a lot of commercial industrial property. And so using your capital to leverage that return on that asset. Those are the two ways I think about leverage.
Well, I think if you're a consultant, you'd find a whole lot more ways. And I think, I think leverage is a verb, isn't it, for a consultant? So it's like you can leverage this and leverage that. And so I think that's where the word becomes completely overused, and be it that it's in conversation or in kind of written reports. So it's definitely one I try and avoid.
Yeah. Have you found a replacement for it that is adequate?
Not a good one that I keep going back to, no.
Right.
I find myself back in the thesaurus quite regularly.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Archimedes, I think it was, said, find me a lever long enough and I will move the earth. And so I think we can kind of go back to the very origins of us as a thinking species, of the importance of that word. Sorry, what was the other one that you mentioned? Synergies. Yeah, okay. That's also a really hard word to replace.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know. I probably use that one less, but
Yeah.
It is definitely a classic kind of consulting term that I think just irks people.
Yeah. How about, so the consulting overall cliche is that our people, really, we've got the best people in the industry. They're the brightest, they're the best trained, the most well certified. Is that something that you ever said, or did you manage to avoid falling into that quagmire?
No, I think that's something we talked about a lot. I think, I think that people, I think the people made a difference to our business, but I think also that that's less sometimes about academic ability. It's about attitude. It's about perspective. And so the way your people front up for your customers, I think, is quite important. And I think at the end of the day, if you looked at all of those services-based businesses, they aren't much more than just the people that sit within them.
Yeah.
And so when clients are picking between, one or three or, whatever they are, we will write proposals of all the other bits and pieces that make us different, but actually in many ways it is the people that they're selecting. It's a conversation between, particularly in a business to business kind of sense, which was the market we worked in. It's a conversation between the buyer who's saying, I've got a need and you've got some ability to help that with me, and I'm buying your people to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, we talk about B2B. In reality, though, sitting behind that is always a P2P, a person to person. Some individual inside the organization has ultimate accountability or signing authority for that relationship to be incepted. And there's an individual who heads that relationship, that delivery at the delivery organization. And so there's a P2P that sits ultimately in there as well. So you're most famous for Davanti. And there's a really interesting origin story. So you were working at a franchise of Capgemini to start with. Tell us that backstory, and then we can jump into the founding story.
Yeah, so in New Zealand, or Capgemini had effectively pulled out of Asia Pacific, and the guys that were running that, in fact, the New Zealanders, if you like, who were playing a key role, I think they were playing a key role across APAC, got wind of that and effectively managed to buy the New Zealand business and set a franchise arrangement that allowed them to keep using the brand. And so that's the business that I joined. I'd kind of known them from earlier years, known one of them quite well. And so that's the business that I joined. And the way that they ran that business effectively gave us the blueprint for how we ran Davanti, particularly in the early years.
Yeah. Capgem, my recollection is they were a kind of technology consulting with a business wrapper around the outside. And so was it implementation of financial systems, ERP, CRMs, et cetera, or was it something slightly different?
Yeah, so Capgemini was still a global company out of France with a strong technology bent, and they bought Ernst & Young's management consultancy business. And so in New Zealand, it was the Ernst & Young guys who effectively became Capgemini before my time, and that then went on to found CG&Z.
Okay, got it.
And so we were doing, I came in to run the technology function. So it was a big, so tech strategy and also kind of a big build function. That's a really interesting projects like the software that runs the Maui gas pipeline, and which I think was probably the biggest bespoke development project in New Zealand at the time.
Yeah. That would have had a lot of I'm going to get the term wrong, probably SCADA, like control devices in there as well.
No. So this was the system that was actually replacing an Excel spreadsheet, a very complicated Excel spreadsheet. And New Zealand has two gas transmission pipelines. So one was owned at the time by NGC, and the other one was by Vector, but Vector bought both of them. So we ended up building a system for both.
Right.
And so it's effectively the system that controls how much gas you can put into the pipeline and what you get charged for, and how all that works, because obviously gas is taken out at different points along the pipeline. And funnily enough, you learnt that actually people store gas in the pipeline. Probably not at the moment, but
right.
in the past there's things around storing gas in the pipeline as well.
Yeah, wow. Okay, that's fascinating. So if you think about what proportion of New Zealanders run on gas, I don't know these days. I think it's something in the region of 15 to 20% of our electricity, because we've gone back to that as being one of the primary sources of fossil fuel generation. So it's pretty important for the New Zealand electricity supply chain environment. And like the banking system, which is still run on COBOL KIX DB2 systems, they've tried to replace it with more modern systems. Here's the gas system that was historically run on Excel spreadsheet. I love that.
Yeah, I think that system's still in operation today.
Yeah, cool. The sign of a well-written piece of software is that it can still run 20 years later.
I'm sure it's well supported, but yeah.
Well, no doubt patched, bug fixed on a regular basis. So there were three colleagues that were sitting together in Capgemini, and it was yourself and your two co-founders, ultimately, of Davanti, and you decided, we want to get into this consulting space ourselves. And you made a really interesting decision, which was to go, let's go and start it inside another organization. Tell us about those origin stories and conversations.
Yeah, so I think CG&Z had been sold, and we were treated really well because we had effectively been made partners, and we were treated really well by those guys through that sale process, and part of the consultation of being involved in those conversations. But at the end of the day, there were four major shareholders that made that call to sell that business to Hewlett-Packard, which wasn't our desired path or what we thought would kind of come out of that. And so I think we always felt that there were some things we wanted to implement that we wanted, to prove to ourselves we could do things a bit better. And so Davanti kind of came out of that concept that said, let's go and have a chance to do that. And yet we'd seen some benefits out of, we worked in HP for 2 years. And so we saw some benefits out of that. And so we went looking for a larger organization that we thought we could do that with to bring the best of that together, and approached a couple and ended up having a conversation with Genai and effectively established that business inside Telecom at the time, Spark, under Genai with Chris Quinn's sponsorship.
How did you select Genai/Spark to have that conversation with?
I don't recall specifics. I know we did talk to a few. I think that we probably didn't know the stakeholders at Spark at that time, and we didn't know what their ambitions were in that area. We probably felt there was some access to customers and some other bits that kind of worked, and so we were exploring a bunch of different options. And what we found on the inside is that was something that they were very interested in, that they had some capability that wasn't going as well as what they would have liked. I think it was a bit of a, that whole journey was a bit of a pinch me moment, that we managed to build a very entrepreneurial kind of business inside a public listed company. To create that opportunity at the start, and then also just to go on and make it successful for so long, and which worked for both parties.
Yeah. I'm going to unpack that, but I'm just going to go back a step here, because there's an interesting thing that I talk about as a part of my governance approach, so assisting organizations to build effective governance. So I work with earlier stage companies that might be $2 to $5 million, and they desire to get to the stage of an exit. And a critical part of that is having independent governance of the business, so that there's kind of the ability to check the validity of what's gone on, the maturity of the organization, the independent decision making, et cetera, all those sort of things that are important. And as a part of my slide deck, because I have to convince people that it is the right thing to do. If they don't have an independent advisory board, they need to go through the journey of understanding why it's important. And the case study that I actually use is HP from a valuation perspective. And it's in 1999. It had the same market cap as Amazon, $9 billion. $9 billion. And then if you look ahead between then and now, Amazon is something north of $1 trillion now. I'm not sure exactly today what that market cap is, but it's one of the Magnificent Seven, and a phenomenal success story. If you had bought AWS or Amazon stock back in those days, you would have been talking about 1,000x, I think it is, just give or take. I think I've got that math right. Someone's going to correct me in the comments. But you're talking about a phenomenal return on your investment. Do you know what HP is worth today?
I probably know, but it's a much smaller business.
$9 billion.
Right.
$9 billion today, right? And so the story that I have, and it's a number, it's not one simple thing, but what people often talk about is the biggest failure overall with HP was a failure of governance. They appointed a series of really poor CEOs to the role that lasted for 18 months, 2 years. One of them ended up in court. There was a sexual harassment case against another one, and they had, over the period of 10 years, they had 5 CEOs in place. One of them, Meg, I forget her surname, had a grand vision and wanted to do something with the business and kind of executed upon that to a certain extent, but wasn't given the proper runway to make it happen, and was fired. And then there was these other ones that made these terrible acquisitions. And so what was an incredible company, the literal founder of Silicon Valley was HP, Bill Hewlett, and the other Packard guy. They were the people that started in a shed in Silicon Valley. They were the very, very origin story of that, now storied bit of technology history. And governance was the key issue, because, what are the key things the board do? They provide independence of decision making, an overview of strategy, some risk management, and most importantly, they hire and fire the CEO. So therefore, in my mind, and that's part of the story. Now, the question is, they bought the CG&Z business. You worked for them for 2 years in New Zealand. And without denigrating the individuals in the business, because I was familiar with the HP business back in those days in NZ, there were some really good people that were here. What did you see about how that organization was run, though? What did you learn about both how to run a business? I know it's a long time ago here, but I'm curious about how to run a business and how not to run a business.
Well, I think the key part personally from us is that we didn't want to go back into a global business. So I'd kind of felt I'd done, I'd worked for Oracle. I loved working for Oracle at the start of my career. But that wasn't kind of the path that I saw myself on. And so as much as we thought we might get the opportunity to buy CG&Z, which we didn't kind of get, and we'd never really thought much beyond we might get the opportunity to buy, going into a global business wasn't kind of what I was looking for at that time. And so
How come?
I I think probably just we were looking for more kind of local autonomy. I think, I think we'd seen, and one of the things that CGNZ had done very well was that kind of local autonomy, the ability to act quickly, the ability to serve the local market, to price locally, that, you were going to struggle under a big global company. And those, my experience in the US-based tech companies is that they effectively run the rest of the world like it's America. And so it doesn't matter what the uniquenesses of the market is. Their view is, this is the template that you use. This is how things work. This is what our expectations are, regardless of where you are in the world. And New Zealand is probably at the end of the bell curve in terms of how well that fits. And so I think, I would look at it and say one of HP's challenges, right, is that it succeeded and grew up in the hardware world. And as Amazon proves, we'd moved into the software world. And there's a completely different generation of technology. And so lots of those hardware companies never survived, to be fair to HP. They're still ticking around. At the time we joined, they were obviously a big printer company. It was a big, it was different divisions. But, printers were probably where they were making all ink. It wasn't really printers. There was no money in printers. But selling ink was where they were making all their money. Yeah. And they ran a business which was, based on some global things and about trying to take some cost out on some things that probably didn't matter. But
yeah, it was the cost of the manufacture, the cost of supporting and developing the brands got such that those American behemoths, Dell, HP, Compaq, at that period, the hardware manufacturers kind of struggled against the Chinese and the Taiwanese manufacturers. And so their market share got eroded and they just kind of, business got more and more difficult for them. And now it's very much dominated by that part of the world. So it makes sense. I'm trying to think of anyone that actually managed to cross that divide successfully. Intel and the chip space have always done pretty well, but the last few years haven't treated them that kindly. I learned about a guy, the Taiwan semiconductor founder, 70,000 employees, 70 billion net worth, a guy you've never ever heard of, and the numbers are all in the 70s. 70% of the world's devices are run from the chips that his company manufactures, and we've never heard of them, so they've certainly overtaken Intel. So global, not going to work for you. Totally get it. So you approached Spark. Chris Quinn, was Chris the sponsor of this inside Spark at that stage?
Yeah. So we decided we'd approach Spark, and Matt and I knew someone that could make that introduction for us. And so we went and talked to Kim Milletta in Wellington. I think it was in December. And Kim said, I'll get you a meeting with Chris. That won't be a problem. And it must have been like 2 weeks before Christmas. And Kim brings up, probably, I don't know if he rang Chris or he rang Serena, it was Chris's EA, and said, you need to meet these guys. And so when I was away somewhere, and so Matt and Robert turned up in Chris's office Christmas Eve, and Serena says to them, I have no idea how you got this meeting. This better be good, because we all want to go home. And that was the first meeting where we went and pitched and said, we want to build this business consultancy business. Are you interested? And Chris was about to head away for holidays. And then I met him in the middle of January in a cafe in Remuera. And we spent kind of 6 months kind of working through that, and started in May.
I've not worked directly with Chris. I've met him a few times. And one of the things that always stands out for me in my memory about him is that he is actually very entrepreneurial for a big company CEO. And so was that the thing that resonated with him? The kind of like, I can feel these guys' energy, I get where they're going, and I can understand the vision of what they're doing, or was it something different?
Yeah, I think that, Geno came out of a background of wanting to provide services to, to large enterprises. And so this was another set of services that would help in that story. I think I think he liked us. I think, we probably had a 10-page PowerPoint deck, but, at the end of the day, he's meeting the individuals that are going to found this. And I'm sure he's sitting there asking, can these guys deliver on what they're promising on? And so it kind of fitted with what Geno was trying to achieve. And like we had an ongoing conversation as to how we'd make that work and what we were trying to build and how that would work with Spark. And, and Simon Mutter, who was CEO at the time, kind of signed it off and said, well, you're not to do any work inside Spark, which was fine with us, but it was also a really sensible decision, because it basically meant we weren't going to get sucked into the machine and kind of never got to go and visit a customer because we were doing work for Spark. And so that was the only real restriction that was put on us, was that, when you're not to work internally.
Which I guess is a blessing and a curse, right? Because there would have been millions of dollars of consulting fees available inside that business. So did they treat you as being like a division of the company and you were sitting in the office in the corner, or were you treated as being like a skunk works? I'll contextualize that question while you're thinking about it. So I recall back in the late 90s, this is going back a long time, when telecom started their first ISP, Net something or other, not Netscape, it was Net something or other. And they put them into a different office. They treated them as a startup that was being incubated by the business, and independent CEO, independent governance, and they gave them a whole lot of money, and it absolutely thrived.
Yep.
And they completely kicked ass and went out and dominated that space. And then after a couple of years, telecom execs are like, oh, look at this revenue line, look at this profit line we can bring in. So they brought it in and they killed it, because they killed the innovation and the dynamism and the reason people had to go and work in this kind of really cool, interesting sort of place. It worked from a revenue standpoint, but the fascinating, interesting things about their business were kind of largely removed. How did they deal with Davanti and you guys?
Well, I remember turning up on the first day, and the receptionists were two elderly ladies kind of at the end of their career, were really excited. They'd heard about these guys that were starting this business, and they were like so excited to see us. And I was like, oh, okay, there's been a bit of a sales pitch going on here before as we kind of walk in.
Great white hope.
Yeah, it's like not only that, it's like, we'd made all these promises, right? It's like, oh, people are now expecting us to deliver on those promises. And so we went into that office. We were, it was only Rob and I in Auckland. And so we had two desks. And then effectively, I think we got kicked out of that building in 3 weeks because they were about to renovate it. And then we got chucked in another building. And so we moved around a few different buildings in those Spark years. But we were effectively treated independently. So we were Spark employees officially. We operated on their financial systems. We sent invoices out that probably had Spark on the letterhead, I think. But we were given, we were allowed to have our own name. Chris gave us pretty much full autonomy. We kind of hired outside of we probably had some different guidelines at times that we had to kind of follow, but we were allowed to kind of hire without the restrictions that were on other parts of the business. It was inside a publicly listed company. I think it was pretty phenomenal, the freedom we were given to go and succeed. And obviously we were successful at doing that because the rules probably would have changed had we not had those targets and been successful and done that type of stuff.
So in some respects, you were like a team within Spark, but in others, you had your independence and a brand around it.
Yeah.
What governance, if any, did they apply to you? Did you have to attend, did you have a quarterly board meeting with someone from Spark? What was the approach?
So Chris was effectively our board representative. So we had a meeting with Chris. I can't remember how frequently they were, but Chris would effectively sit and challenge. And so we would have those we'd provide updates as the partners, if you like, of Davanti to Chris. And Rob, for periods of time, sat on the executive team at Genai as a Lincoln, but I don't think that lasted forever. So they just kind of left us to it, and our relationships were, in many ways with the sales guys and the handful of salespeople probably that really saw value in taking us into accounts, and how we made that work.
So you got access to the telecom sales team to get introductions to their accounts.
Well, yeah, we had access to the Genai sales team. And I think the interesting thing about Spark was they had incredible ability to go and get meetings with customers, because, telecommunications was still quite a bit of expenditure on the balance sheet. I don't personally think they were very good at knowing what to talk about once they got those meetings. Right. And so here were these 4 guys that they could roll into those meetings who could have a sensible business conversation. And so they love some of that. And so, so there's some of those people, Chris would keep on asking, it's like, well, how are you going engaging with the sales team? And it's like, well, we were kind of converting them one by one. And so some of them, Vanessa Sorensen, for example, absolutely loved it. And we worked really, really closely with her. And we went on and did great things in different customers because she kind of saw the value and got the pitch. It was something you had to convince them one by one. And so we took responsibility for selling our own work. We were still out there, outside, completely independent of Genai, going and talking to customers, building relationships, and doing that ourselves. We weren't relying on anyone else, including in the Genai sales team, to go and do it for us.
Love Vanessa, such a dynamo, enigmatic and such a powerful woman. Love her so much. So I get that she would have gotten the value proposition. So the challenge that I'm aware of in working with Spark as a partner, inside or outside, and this was came clear to me 20 years ago with one of my earlier angel investments, is that we had won the right to sell through Spark, and it was kind of like, hey, amazing, great, wonderful, and the team was really happy about it because we saw them as being a critical access point to market. And then what we discovered is that the work actually started once that agreement was signed. So all of the work that went into winning it was just the precursor, because everything after that was around sales enablement. So training, incentivizing individually, building relationships with the salespeople, showing them what it is, how it worked. And so we had to build this complete sales enablement function that we didn't anticipate building to get that thing to work. Whereas you guys, what I'm hearing you say is that you were inside the organization, you could see them, you were present, you're bumping into them around the water cooler. Metaphorically, I'm sure you had regular meetings and those sort of things with them as well.
Well, same problem though. It was still a sales enablement thing. I think the biggest value we got out of that is, when we're dealing with those kind of customers, they already had master services agreements in places with those customers. So we didn't have a kind of contractual barrier to go do work there. We're like, oh, we'll just give you a whatever it was called, a statement of work on that master services agreement. And everyone's like, oh, that sounds great. That'll work for us. And so it certainly took away some of those commercial barriers.
Yeah. It's something that people that don't sell into enterprise, who believe that that is the key to unlocking their growth, don't realize at the outset, is that actually always the hardest thing to overcome is getting the right to supply.
Yes.
And getting the ability to invoice. Getting a purchase order that you can attach your things to. And so, critical part of the growth, obviously. So did you put a lot of effort and energy into building sales enablement for the Gen I sales force?
Probably not. We took, as I said, we probably put some effort into it. We took that responsibility ourselves mostly, and some people got it and worked really, really well. And others, we were just in those accounts directly. And there was never really, because there weren't any really overlap services. There was no one at Spark who was unhappy because we were in an account that happened to be theirs. They were going to get comped on stuff that we did in there. So they were like, oh, if you're in there, that's happy days, good for me. So there was no kind of conflict in that sense. Yes. And, having our own brand was a bit of a challenge, because that was something that, Chris was kind of comfortable with. And it was when, I'm trying to think who was the tall Scotsman that came in as CEO. And so Chris actually ran we couldn't come up with a name for the business. And Spark gave us 3 criteria. We didn't do a very good job. So Chris ran an internal competition, and it was someone inside the business who came up with Davanti as a name, which I liked. So we got to pick it. And then Chris went and announced it. And it was like the day after Paul, who was the CEO, he basically was trying to limit the brands. And so Chris is like, over breakfast, 8 a.m. on a Monday morning, I get this call from the new CEO who's only been in the job 3 months. It's like, what the hell is this new brand that you've just been announced? We're trying to have less brands, not more brands. And
yes.
And so Chris kind of carried that for us, but it worked well. And I think over that period, as much as we were in a Spark building, and in the later years we were in the Spark building on Victoria Street West, when Spark effectively had one building, our employees probably felt they worked for Davanti rather than Spark. And so at the time when we exited Spark, it didn't really make any difference to them. We'd managed to build our own culture and our own environment and our own brand, and so nothing really changed on that front.
Yeah. Spoiler alert. So we're talking about a unique route to foundership here, and there's a management buyout which is coming, and then there's an ultimate sale of the company. So I'm unpacking this because this is a very unique way to get ownership of a business, which leads me to my next question, is that you actually weren't shareholders in that original venture inside Davanti. So without revealing the details, but how did you establish what your package was going to look like? Was it like salary bonus, profit share? What are those?
Yeah, we went in looking for a joint venture. So we were asking for a shareholding, and Spark basically came back and said, no, we're not doing that. We don't. Yeah, that's right. We do shareholdings with $100 million businesses, not 4 turkeys that think they're going to build a consulting business.
Yeah, right.
And so they effectively offered us a bonus based on a profit share. And so we had a salary which we negotiated, and then we were effectively, our bonus was based on a profit share of the business that we were running.
Like a lot of it. Like, did you get half of it split between the 3 of you, or was it?
I think it was kind of close to a third of it between us or something like that. So it was a good arrangement. That worked for us, it worked for them. No one had probably thought beyond how it might work 5 or 6 or kind of more years in.
Yes.
But it was kind of, as far as we were thinking, it was going to work for us.
So you mentioned specifically, you called out the culture and the experience, like the customer experience and the employee experience of working for Davanti, how the name had been created. Does it mean anything, by the way, or is it a cool word?
It means in front in Italian.
Okay,
or
cool.
ahead or in front.
Yeah, cool. Okay. I actually never looked into the word. I'm a enthusiast of using Latin words, specifically Latin, to name companies, and all my companies have Latin names,
Right.
except for two commas, because I don't even know what that is in Latin, but if people wouldn't understand it, two commas makes sense. But how did you go about, you did things like dress ups at Christmas parties, but what else did you do? How did you go about building the unique culture as a wholly owned subsidiary of the big beast that was Spark?
Yeah, so I think we were out there hiring. We didn't do any hiring through Spark, so we were effectively doing our own hiring, and so we were effectively out approaching candidates about joining Davanti, and then we were explaining to them that actually you were kind of joining Spark, so that when they got the employment contract that had Spark all over it, that they kind of made sense. And yeah, we did I think throughout that kind of full journey, not just that. So yes, there were some things we wanted to do that we'd borrowed off CGNZ. So we had an annual conference where we got all of our Auckland Wellington staff together. We did branded clothing, and some high quality kind of stuff, and laptop bags and other bits and pieces over time, and different generations of that. We had a tight team. We did social activities, but we had a tight team that enjoyed working together, and kind of that's, our teams didn't really have a lot of interaction outside with Spark, kind of outside of what they did in the team, apart from the fact, certainly in the early years when we were in our own space effectively, or, there might have been other Gen I people there, but it wasn't like it was different when we moved to Victoria Street West and you had a big building that effectively was all Spark. But by that stage, the business was quite mature.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and the fancy dress stuff came out of, our first conference. So, so our first conference, our conference was, format effectively was a Thursday night kind of meet and greet, a Friday kind of work day. I think at that, we hadn't started awards at that stage, so we probably just had a normal dinner on a Friday night, and then a Saturday morning kind of team building activity, and then a kind of head home. And what we found the first time around is that everyone got hammered on the Thursday night.
First
And Friday was a bit of a write-off.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, this isn't really working. It was good fun, but it wasn't really working.
Yeah.
And, in Spark in their normal way, we're working with a bunch of event companies, and so they were kind of like, oh, you should talk to these guys. And they're like, oh, you'll never solve that problem. That's just how things roll. It's like, and then I can't remember why, but we decided we were going to do, make Friday an awards night. And Jen and I were very good at doing awards. And so we kind of copied lots of stuff that they did around that, and how we did an annual set of awards, and we were going to make it fancy dress. And so Friday became the big highlight of the whole conference, and it kind of solved the Thursday night problem.
Right. People had something to look forward to the next
and
night.
so they saved themselves.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and it made Fridays much more productive.
Yes.
Yeah.
That awards thing can't be overstated, the importance of it. All of the companies that I work with, I always advocate to them, firstly, get very, very clear on your values and don't have cliches, and say what they mean, so what it means to live into those values. And then I go for extra points, have a weekly thing where each of the staff members, depending on the team size and team or across the whole company, recognizes each other for living into the values in some way, shape or form. So you're repeating the values on a weekly basis. Yeah. And then have an annual award. So a monthly thing where someone gets a dinner voucher, and then an annual thing where someone gets to go away to, Queenstown or whatever it might be, depending on where you are. And that's like the big annual thing, but it's all about the values. So was it values based, or was it sales performance based?
It would have been a range.
Just dress up based?
No, there are no dress up prizes. It was performance based. We're a pretty performance based organization. So there would have been some different things around, the way we measured our people. So around sales and delivery quality and leadership and other bits. And so that's what the awards were based on from memory. We did the same thing, right? We had weekly or monthly awards. We had a performance framework of how we measured our people on a 6 monthly kind of basis. We had bonuses for our staff, or an at-risk kind of incentive. And then our annual awards were kind of outside of that cycle and was something kind of quite different.
Yeah.
And it became quite a big deal. And, I think Jen and I had done that incredibly well. And it was one of those things that, from a Spark perspective, as the kind of cost came out, those things got watered down, and yet they were so valuable, and the cost of doing it was probably insignificant in the bigger picture. But that was kind of what our observation was outside. But it became a really big thing in Davanti, and it was really prestigious to win some of those awards, and the team were delighted for the people that had won it. It was a really cool thing to be part of, yes. And to see the reaction of staff and to see how much it meant to them.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. You guys obviously like playing dress ups, and I'm going to ask you what your best outfit was. And while you're thinking about that, I'll share my own personal story around it. I used to be a real curmudgeon with dress up parties.
Right.
and I would be like, oh, bloody dress up parties, and I'd put a lame effort in. And then I went to a couple of these things where a particular group was just wholly immersed in the dress up.
Yeah. It's a 100% commitment kind of thing.
100% commitment. You can't like 50% of your way in because it's, you're copping out and it really, really is obvious. What I learned over time, and I was at a thing in Sydney and it was a beautiful day, and I bought this super fruity short and shorts outfit and a matching hat, and looked pretty cool, but also fruity as hell. And on the way to this event, at the event, and after the event, I realized that my dressing up brought a whole lot of joy to everyone else, because this ridiculous guy is prepared to like laugh at himself and have a good time, but also it's kind of cool and ridiculous, right? And so what I learned is that you actually don't dress up for you dress up for other people because it brings them joy, right? And it's a super cool thing to be able to do. What was your favorite outfit? What was your wildest, stupidest outfit?
My favorite outfit would have been Beetlejuice. So that is my favorite costume that I wore to function. It was actually a dress. This come back to me. So dress up we stole from CG&Z as well. That was a thing that they'd done on their annual conferences. So yeah, that would have been my favorite. We had some amazing. So people went 100% all in, and so it was one of those things that for new staff members had to kind of get their head around the fact that don't just kind of dip your toe in the water here because you'll look like a turkey.
Yeah.
And there were amazing costumes every year. We had a theme. So we had those conferences were pretty special. They were pretty awesome experiences. To get Auckland, we did a few in Queenstown. And we were trying to look for locations to bring Auckland and Wellington together. So we tried to do different places, but sometimes logistics just made certain venues kind of easier. They're pretty cool memories.
I remember early on in my employment across different businesses that were national, Taupo was always the favoured place because Auckland and Wellington would be the dominant presences, and so Taupo was this inevitable conference venue, and the Holy Cow was the place you'd inevitably end up at later at night, which was that bar that was upstairs on the corner, which was a wild place, dancing on tables and all sorts of shenanigans. But anyway, so I'm going to come to the management buyout because that's a key part of the journey. But before I do, the question I have is, looking back, now being an experienced, founder doing the buyout and then selling that company ultimately, the deal that you negotiated with Telecom, with Spark, for you to come in as employees, looking back, knowing what you know now, would you do the same deal? Or actually, a better question is, what would you change about the deal that you did with them?
I think I'd definitely do the same deal.
Okay.
So I think that I think professional services is a bit different, right? And that if I'd gone and taken a partnership at PwC, which would have been a more traditional kind of approach, or any of the big four, I would have paid some money in, which is effectively a kind of cash flow contribution. And I've effectively, I hold a profit share. And then when I leave or retire or whatever else, there's no equity change in value. And I leave and my profit share kind of stops. And so that's not really any different from the deal we did with Spark. And so I think that deal worked very well for Spark and for us. And they honored it for a long time. And so it was a pretty, like I said, it was a pinch myself kind of thing that says, for all you might think of Telecom or Spark, here was a very entrepreneurial way to go and grow some new services that were great for their customers, that it allowed us to build a really cool business. And, it eventually just got to a stage where they decided they didn't want to own it anymore, which lots of people were disappointed about, but that's what public listed companies decide sometimes.
Yeah. Hey, legend. Thanks for your ears. I really appreciate you listening to the show. Everything improves through feedback. I'd be really grateful if you could head to my website, joshcomrie.com, just click on the podcast link and fill out a 2-minute survey, which will give me the insights around the things that you're enjoying about the show and where you would like us to go more into the future. It'll take less than 2 minutes. I'd be really grateful. And you'll also receive some free resources should you share your email address with us. Thanks so much and enjoy the rest of the show. You mentioned before in our conversation and notes that professional services in New Zealand is unique, and you've said it again there. What about it here specifically in your mind is unique?
Yeah, so if you looked at most other markets, and Australia is our closest market, and so it's really easy, that you're commanding much higher rates. So the bill out rates of those services providers, that any of those professional services, be it that kind of the big four or others, are charging a significant more amount of money. So New Zealand companies don't like to pay a high bill out rate for professional services. They like to hear the global story. They like to see the global expertise. They just don't like to kind of pay for it when the rubber hits the road. And the size of those projects in New Zealand don't really work in the way that those global companies kind of operate. And that's been an interesting time to go through as we move to more cloud-based solutions and more agile kind of project delivery, is that, having a 100-person SAP project that goes on for 3 years, that, that was the model that those big firms worked under, and those projects didn't exist in New Zealand. And so it was much harder. You had to be much more nimble as to how you were going to run a business here, to keep your consultants busy, to find project work, to shape them in the ways that would work. And I think before the days of the internet, and I'm aging myself here a little bit because that's not kind of my generation, but the consulting methodologies, right, which mostly came out of the US, were all built for going and doing IT strategy in a massive company. They weren't built for doing it in New Zealand. It was like you had to take a methodology that was built to spend 9 months doing an IT strategy with 30 consultants and figure out how to do it in 12 weeks with 3 of you and get the same kind of output that was relevant for the company. And so the methodologies, which at that time, all those consulting companies would said was a great IP asset they held, really had very little relevance in this market. And of course, with the rise of the internet, they had no relevance at all, because anyone could go and Google lots of the IP that they supposedly held on their secret knowledge bases.
I don't know where this question's going to go, but I'm going to ask it nonetheless. It was triggered by the lack of, large SAP, for example, projects in New Zealand. There was a relatively high-profile one which went $110 million over budget, which was Auckland Council. And so it was like 5 years late, 110 million over budget, and didn't deliver, half of the intended benefits. Is that something you were at all familiar with? And if so, did you have any view on that project?
No, we didn't. We never did any SAP work. And when we set up, Robert had come out of a package implementation background and was running that side of the business, or part of that side of the business at CG&Z. And we consciously didn't want to, when we set Davanti up, it wasn't our intention to implement technology. That was Robert kind of done and dusted that. I was trying to move out of the bespoke software space. And so we were trying to position ourselves much more at the business end, kind of business before technology kind of story. And, and the way we got into Salesforce almost by chance.
How did that happen?
Well, the guy that had brought Salesforce to New Zealand knew us and kind of came and said, look, we're looking for some more partners. Will you guys come on board? Come and help me out. How do we make this work? It's kind of really united.
The early Salesforce days like this?
No, probably. I think Salesforce was early 2000s. I think we were probably late, 2009 or something.
Right.
Yeah. So Salesforce was still in smaller organizations with smaller footprint, but not in the very early days of it as a business.
Yeah.
Still before the days of wide adoption of SaaS.
Yes.
So still, certainly at the start of SaaS into New Zealand businesses.
And so you were running this combined kind of business consulting, bit of technology, but Salesforce practice, and you were 50, 60 odd staff. And then at one stage, one day, Telecom decides they want out.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Why?
We didn't really ask, because that was, we were just like, we never thought we'd hear this. This sounds pretty good.
Right.
Let's not ask the questions we don't need the answers to.
Yeah.
I could speculate on that, but I don't really know. That was kind of, so Chris had moved out of Gen I. I don't think Chris ever would have sold that business. It was a big feather in his cap, and he loved it. And so the fact that Chris had moved into a different role and, moved into the retail business kind of helped us, I suspect. And they said, we don't really want to own this anymore. Will you guys figure out if you'll, if and how you'll come and buy it, and come and tell us how you'll do it?
Yeah. Okay. How did that conversation go? How was the deal structured?
I think we went and we rang up someone that we knew personally, who was I think he'd left Bell Gully at the time, but he was a lawyer. I kind of, and said, look, we need a bit of help here. And he probably came and spent 4 hours with us, and it was probably really, really valuable. So the first thing he said is, okay, so what are you really buying? And he said, don't tell me you're buying people, because they're a liability. So it's like, what are you really buying here? And then he's like, and then my second piece of advice is, you need to make this deal easy for Spark. So don't go and ask for warranties or indemnities or anything else. Just make this deal as simple as possible for them, so that, and it was great advice. And of course, we were that business. We were running it inside out. There was no, we knew more about it than Spark did. So there was no point in us asking for anything like that anyway. We kind of, we couldn't have known any more about what was going on. And so we kind of went back to the table and said, well, we're kind of prepared to pay this. We went and got some support from the bank first. We went and had a conversation, which was an interesting kind of journey. And
They probably would have wanted your houses as security, I'm guessing. Though.
so we knew some. Matt finally remembered that he knew someone quite senior in the bank at about 11 p.m. on a Friday night in the viaduct, and he's in Auckland. He goes, "Oh, I know who I can call." And so he texts this guy, and he goes, "Oh yeah, I'll do breakfast with you tomorrow." It's like, well, why didn't we think of this a week ago? But okay, we're having it now. And so we kind of gave a pretty verbal sales pitch, and he pretty much said in that meeting, it's like, yeah, this is something we can back. I'll on those kind of numbers that you're talking about, we'd probably inflated those numbers to give ourselves some wiggle room because we didn't know what we were going to end up. He's like, yeah, we'll make that work for you. And it wasn't a bank that any of us personally banked with. And he would say that the banks wouldn't do that deal now, which I think is pretty disappointing, to be honest, because I think that kind of worked. And I think the amazing ANZ was the bank. And I think the amazing thing through that is, we spent, we probably had 4 months after that. ANZ never made us fill in a bit of paper or register as a customer or anything until like 2 weeks before the deal closed. And so it was, they put a guy onto that who was effectively our contact who ran the process with us and did the banking side of it. And they were amazing to deal with. And, and I'd approached ASB because they were my bank. And we kind of, the first thing you got was a bit of paper that says, well, can you fill this in? And we'll kind of
25 pages.
Yeah, like, well, actually, I haven't got time to do that. We're quite busy at the moment, and we said, well, we'll come back and run a competitive process kind of thing. But in the end, it was like, well, why would we do anything here? We've kind of been looked after. But we did that with vendor finance, and then we went back to Spark and said, well, we'll pay this, but how about we pay it over a period of time as part of as the business kind of accumulates, and they were happy to do that, and
100% vendor finance, or a little bit of cash from the ANZ.
No cash from ANZ. I can't remember if we put money in or not, but and then we'd shared a budget, we'd built a budget with and so we sat down with Spark and said, well, this is kind of what we're thinking, and they said, oh, what's this line? And we said, oh, well, that's accommodation. We're going to need some office space. And he goes, no, you guys can stay here. I was like, oh, that never really crossed our minds. It's like, well, that's actually works pretty well for us. And then the property guys at Index Spark were very happy because what we'd put in the property line was nowhere near what they felt the property was worth. But that's what we'd kind of agreed to pay. And so I try to think how long we stayed there for, probably 2 or 3 years. And they kind of kept on slowly shrinking the area we were allowed because that was all they felt we were paying for.
Like the Russians on their borders, they're kind of encroaching on the neighbours' borders.
Yeah, and so Spark effectively, we said, well, we're more than happy to give that money to you if that's what it was allocated for, and that's kind of how the deal worked. And then we had the biggest, most important piece of that, I guess, was as a transition around customer contracts. So they gave us a 12-month period to effectively have independent contracts for those customers. So in the meantime, we could bill through them. And then I think the other great piece of advice we were given was to make it really easy for employees. And so we effectively had identical employment contracts with a different logo on the top of them. Spark were more than happy to share those with us. We, all the benefits were kept the same. We kept a fortnightly pay cycle, which was the same. So nothing really changed from an employee perspective. And it was interesting, later down the track when we sold to Dentsu, one of the big arguments we had during that deal was that they wanted everyone to change employment contracts as part of the deal. And it's like, well, why? That's just an impediment. You want us to hold on to these staff, and yet you want them to go and, we'd gone from a 7-page employment contract, Dentsu's with like 25. And it's like, why would you go and do that? And in the end, we had a guy come in from Singapore who said, oh no, we don't need to do that. That's fine. But it was a great lesson, and I think great support from Spark that we just kept it really easy for staff.
So I'm just going to relay the terms of this deal, because this is a sweetheart deal, right?
Oh, well, probably on commercial terms, sure, but
I'm going to run back over this and reflect on this. So you managed to get Spark to pay. You paid them from future profits. So in other words, we don't have to reach into our pockets now. The business was going to be profitable because this. You had clear visibility of the order book, and you also knew you were selling the thing, and you were out there.
Well, yeah, no one knew more about it than us.
Yep, 100%. And you also had the ability to evaluate the staff capabilities, loyalty, where all the talent sat inside the business. So you pull those across. You didn't have to go through the pain of moving the business into a different space. You already had an independent brand, so you could do that straight away. You could lift and shift the terms and conditions across, and you had a whole year to work with customers to go, it's kind of gradually work out some terms that would enable us to transition from one to the other. This is a beautiful deal.
Yeah, and at that time, I can't remember if it was a year, right? But when you were trying to renegotiate contracts with public sector in particular, we were going to need quite a lot of time, and there was a lot of effort kind of went into that. And, and so we ended up with a bunch of, we had to take on, there was cash flow support out of ANZ, obviously, we suddenly had to start paying some quite big salary bills and change some other bits and pieces. But that was kind of the framework of how it kind of worked. And and I think we stayed in the premises, and the not funny thing was, but it was within 3 months of that was the earthquake in Wellington. And so, and Wellington was really prone to massive building issues. And so we were so lucky that we were inside a Spark building. It was a brand new build. And, someone basically emailed us and told us if we could go in the building. We didn't have to worry about any of the other bits and pieces of that. And that would have been a massive headache for the business at that time. So that was probably the silver lining around staying in the premises, the benefit of that.
So you went from being an employee of a large listed company that was running jointly with your partners, and I'll come to the business partnership in a second, a independent but contained subsidiary, essentially, to having independence and ownership. Third, is that right?
Yeah.
Yep. What was that like when you did the deal? What was that moment like?
I don't think we never really felt like employees to start with. So I don't think attitude-wise and the way we looked at the business had changed at all. I think the thing that changed was that we needed some long-term certainty from a strategy perspective. And as much as we had a great arrangement with Spark, we never really knew how long that would last. At any time they could come back and say, well, hang on, we're going to renegotiate these deals or whatever else. And so there was no real incentive to build long-term strategy. And so that was a certainty we were really looking for. We'd probably achieved all we wanted to through those Spark years in terms of what the business had achieved. It was now about, well, actually, if we're going to plan for what's next, it's like, that's going to take some time, and we want to be able to kind of plan and invest for that. So, we still felt like we were putting a financial commitment on the table to go and buy that business and sign up to go and do that. They weren't, when we say that we kind of went and got vendor finance, it wasn't that if the business wasn't making that money, we still had to front up and pay that cash. It was, it wasn't that we were just kind of sharing them profit share. And so, it was a commitment kind of thing that says, well, okay, are we prepared to kind of put our hands in our wallets and go and commit that we're going to go and buy this business and move on? And so it's a bit of a scary moment, I think, to as much as we, you like you said, you couldn't be in a situation to know more about what you were buying, but it's a bit of a scary moment to go and do that.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Did you make any changes in the business once you had the ability to have kind of full control?
I think our change was really around strategy. It was around figuring out, okay, so now we've got, our destiny is now within our control. So, well, what does this look like over a 3 or 4 year kind of horizon? What are we trying to do here? Where do we see the opportunities? How do we position the business? And so that, I don't think we made many other changes. It's still a long time ago now, but
yeah. You've been quoted on a number of occasions, either you or one of your business partners is talking about the strength of the business partnership.
Yeah.
What did you do to foster and create, because 3 is a reasonable number of co-founders, 2 is a more regular kind of number, 4 or 5 is getting into quite a tricky sort of territory. But what did you do to foster a great relationship between the 3 of you?
Yeah, so when we started Davanti and we pitched to Spark, there were actually 4 of us.
Okay.
And so before the management buyout, Mick had chosen to leave. And so 3 of us effectively, when the opportunity to buy out come up, there was only 3 of us. So we, and that was split Auckland, Wellington. So Rob and I were both in Auckland, and at that stage, Matt was on his own in Wellington. And I think that, we were very conscious through all of those years that it can be a bit of a lonely place when you're the sole owner on your own. And we got along really, really well. We're very different people. But and Matt is very good on the phone. He's a very relationship-based person. So he wanted to share the kind of highs and lows, but he'd pick up the phone and call you every day kind of thing. And so I think staying connected socially as well as kind of in a business sense was really good. And then later years, if you can, as we kind of stepped out of the business, if you like, and we were kind of working on the business rather than in the business, we spent a day together every month face to face. So, and did that quite religiously, talking about, governance, strategy, where we're at, what we're trying to achieve, probably for the last 2 or 3 years of our ownership.
Yeah. One of the things that I observe within New Zealand executive teams and boards as well is that we don't deal with like the conflict thing terribly well. And I've talked about this before, but I'll say it quickly. I have a continuum. At one end is conflict. It's not productive. It's name calling. It's bad for the relationship. At the other end is harmony, which is happy, smiley faces. In the middle is this thing I call tension, which is productive because you rub up against each other. So what did you do to create environments where you would have some of that positive tension to enable you to have spirited, proper conversations about strategy? Because strategy is not something you accidentally stumble into, and it's a success. Typically, sometimes it is. Timing might be right and product might be right. But did you manage to create that kind of positive tension environment?
I think that I think a lot of that came quite naturally. I think, I don't think we would say that there were lots of things we did to kind of create some of that. I think that, that we were very lucky in the way we got along. I think that, Rob in particular, who had kind of come out of a more traditional management consultancy background, would say to you that, well, if you looked at any of those big four consultancies, you've got partners who are all quite different personalities, and effectively run their own little ship. And so we weren't kind of running our own little ship, but we were kind of also conscious of, that parts of the business, we'd had different responsibilities across the business and how that worked and who had responsibility for what. And, there were different styles amongst that. And it was probably later on as we kind of tried to transition to a leadership team that without us in the middle of it, is that we kind of went and adjusted our styles or learned we had to adjust our styles to make that work as well.
You were growing the business successfully. You were focused on Salesforce as being the critical kind of offering in market. Did you still have the general business consulting practice as well?
Yeah, I just think that Salesforce took off is what happened. So I don't think that was necessarily a conscious choice on our behalf. And so we started drinking from the fire hose and trying to keep up. And so, and New Zealand was, I think, a really well-positioned market for Salesforce because, as if you like, the first kind of enterprise SaaS platform, and they wanted to do more things, but you had smaller companies in New Zealand, and so there was a better fit for the New Zealand companies could do more with the Salesforce platform than what a massive corporation in the US would be. And I remember we took BNZ 1 year to Dreamforce, and the BNZ guys were like, "Oh, we want to go meet some other customers and and see what the innovation is and what we should be learning from." And then we introduced them to a bunch of banks and other bits and pieces, and they kind of came away and said, "Well, we're doing a lot more than these guys." Like, well, yeah, because what they say on the PowerPoint slide and the sales pitch is quite different to reality when you sit down with the executives. And some of these guys, in the US, they were reasonably simple kind of implementations, and we were starting to do some quite sophisticated stuff here. And so the size of the organizations in the New Zealand market is one of the reasons why Salesforce did so well here, and obviously a really well executed, I think, partner strategy, and they were effective at selling the solution. And we had to do a lot of, particularly in Wellington, Matt spent a lot of time kind of doing education across government on SaaS. We had to kind of convince these guys that this was kind of the future of how you were going to buy business applications, how platforms would work. And so many years of going through and doing that.
Yeah. It's really interesting. BNZ's financial services, obviously, and I was listening to a podcast just yesterday, and it was someone, the founder of Solana, which is one of the plumbing around Web3, the crypto space, and he made a comment which I was in the gym and I nearly dropped the weight on my head when I heard this comment. He described the US financial system as the most sophisticated and advanced in the world, and the best, essentially. And I was like, motherfucker, you guys still write checks to each other. Have you been anywhere outside of the States? So we're talking about innovation in financial services, and New Zealand was demonstrating innovation. Unfortunately, it's an Aussie bank, but anyway, that's where we are. And so it's funny how the US think that they're really innovative in these spaces. And sure, crypto was born out of that environment. Yeah. Sure, absolutely. But for the person on the street, the person who's receiving and giving checks that are forged days to clear, whatever it might be, is just an absolute misnomer. I'll come back to the point here. So at what stage, you were growing a great business, Salesforce-centric, Auckland, Wellington, you started to make a foray into Australia?
Yeah, so I think the other thing about our growth in Salesforce is that in the early days, we were probably like a gold standard of what their partners wanted to look like anywhere in the world.
What did that look like?
Well, partly that was because we were bringing deals to Salesforce, right? Because we were already in these clients, we were already having business conversations, and then we were like, well, actually, this kind of fits, and we should bring Salesforce into this conversation. And so Salesforce is, and as we got to know some of those partners globally in later years, lots of those partners were effectively just feeding off leads that Salesforce gave them. And so there was Salesforce measured these things. We were the top ranked partner in Asia Pacific by a significant margin on those kind of measures. And so that gave us not only a great reputation, but also links back in, Salesforce was still small enough that we had links right back into the exec team in San Francisco. And so, we were very much what they wanted their kind of partners to be, and the way that we behaved, and the fact, and credit to Rob because he ran that part of the business in terms of how to really back a vendor and kind of work really closely with that vendor. And we were very conscious that we're only going to work with one vendor, that we were going to put all our eggs in that basket, and we were going to work that channel really, really hard. And it became, massively successful off the back of that.
It's almost a playbook for how to run a great partnership.
Yeah.
Is focus on them as being the sole most important thing in the world. Bring them leads and opportunities. Tell them what you're up to regularly. Share with them the strategies that are working, and get really, really close to the executive team. That's a great playbook for partnership.
Yeah. So if we won one year. I can't remember what the thing was, but we were in San Francisco for Dreamforce, and we won. There were 25 global surfboards given out for this award. So Merkel now has a Davanti or a Salesforce surfboard that we had to figure out how to get back to New Zealand was one of our prizes. So yeah, and it was a pretty significant kind of award. So that was kind of how we were kind of regarded in those early years, and the kind of punching well above our weight.
Yeah, well done.
Around that.
To what extent do you think that had an influence on your ability to then take the company to market and ultimately sell it?
Well, we didn't really take the company to market. I think, people came and approached us. I think there was a confluence of timing there where there were a lot of international businesses that wanted Salesforce capability. And so I think that that was, we saw a convergence in the market, right? So they've been going on for a number of years between the kind of agency kind of UX kind of marketing kind of side, as Salesforce had kind of gone into marketing as well. So that kind of industry, which had obviously been massively disrupted in the traditional advertising agency, the kind of technology build industry that had kind of moved to SaaS, and then the consulting business and the process design and the business first kind of piece of how you brought those things together. And so that was effectively at the core of what we were trying to do strategically, was to differentiate ourselves and position ourselves at the intersection of those three traditional industries that were all going through massive change. And that effectively is what, in the end, attracted people to us, to call us and say, hey, look, would you guys look at selling this business? And we had numerous of those calls over probably in probably a 12-month window, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'd gone in and we were building, we had a small team in Australia at that stage, and we were doing, obviously in New Zealand, we kind of owned the enterprise space. So your traditional global system integrators, as Salesforce would have called them, were really struggling in this market to go and compete with us. And so we were winning deals, significant deals in New Zealand's biggest companies that they probably didn't think we deserved. But they were struggling to get a foothold here. Whereas in Australia, clearly our strategy was quite different. We weren't trying to compete at that end of town. And so we were kind of in the mid-market and how to go out and grow that business. And look, it was going fine, but we were going to struggle to scale on our own without more help. And so we were trying to build some external relationships that might help us do that as well. And, some of those guys kind of said, well, okay, that our relationship sounds great, but would you consider selling us the business as well, kind of thing. So we had a bunch of conversations that kind of started around that.
Was it one of those ones that you had initiated over that 12-month or so period that ultimately became the buyer in Dentsu?
Yeah, Dentsu was one of those. So,
okay. Yeah, cool. Yeah. You made the decision, you mentioned that you worked with Neil Miller. Neil's been on the show, legend, Hunter Ellison, in the legal representation M&A side. You also engaged with a investment advisor, was it Grant Samuel,
Yep.
that you worked with? Inspired decision in my mind, even though you had these people that were sniffing around, because, building a business and selling a business are completely different skill sets, and yet entrepreneurs frequently think that they're the same thing. I'm not a deal advisor. I help people build value in that asset so that when they go to sell, it's worth more. But I think one of the biggest mistakes founders make is they go, I can handle this negotiation. I can handle the intricacies and complexities of it. What made you decide to engage with a M&A advisor?
So shortly after we'd bought the business, so you went back a few years, we chose to engage and Grant Samuel to get a valuation effectively. And I can't remember if we were, I think part of it was actually some insurance we were trying to put in place. We were trying to figure out how much kind of insurance we needed. There was some meaningless kind of reason. And so that was a really interesting process, because outside of the number that they kind of came up with, the way that they looked at the business taught us a whole lot. and some things that they kind of said, well, these are the things we see value in, the things we hadn't necessarily thought about. And so they were things that we started to track. And so I think we got to a stage where it was clear that, there was going to be a serious conversation on acquisition. And we had a conversation about, would we just go and engage a lawyer that we kind of, we'd had some contacts, so we'd just get a lawyer to kind of and start that process. And I felt that we should go back and have a chat to Grant Samuel, and give them the opportunity to kind of tell us, why they should get involved. And because I'd kind of kept that relationship going. And Peter did a really good job of kind of coming and pitching and saying, well, we'd made it easy for him, right? We'd found the buyers and found a number of buyers effectively. And so he kind of convinced us that's how we should go and do it. And I think we'd been through an acquisition in the CG&Z business, but we weren't in the middle of that deal. We were kind of on the periphery of it. We knew lots of what was going on, but not the nitty gritty. And we'd been through a management buyout. And Matt was a lawyer by trade, as much as he wasn't doing that anymore. But, it was the first time for us in that environment. And so it made sense to have some people who'd been there and done that before, just to kind of walk through the process as much as anything else.
Bit of a layup of a deal for Grant Samuel. Here's a whole bunch of buyers that are interested and willing to help us negotiate and put some deal terms in place.
Yeah, but I think that's the I think we got good value out of it. Yep. So I think at the end we felt that we paid probably a reason what felt like a big check when we wrote it, but actually I was quite comfortable we got value out of that. I think that they introduced us to Neil. They introduced us to 2 or 3 different options we could use. They were very conscious of us not picking a lawyer that could kill that deal. So they were very conscious, when we looked at who was likely to buy and that it was going to be an international player, and the way, with a dedicated M&A team who were doing these deals all the time, you had to behave in a certain way. And so that was very much their counsel to us. It's like, well, actually, this is how it's going to go. There'll only be so many things we can control. You need some people who aren't going to kind of come in here with an ego and think they're going to make a name for themselves. And, Neil was obviously very good at navigating his way through that, and he was really fun to work with. So Grant Samuel, I thought, did a great job.
Yeah. Neil's got a calm, he's a really interesting paradox. He's got this super calm, stable energy about him, but a real intensity of focus as well. I think those are hallmarks probably of great lawyers. The stiff backbone, but just super calm with it, chill as well with it. Really likable guy.
Yeah, I also thought it was, I think for people that know Matt Farrow was my business partner out of Wellington, who'd been a lawyer. Matt's one of those people that's, often late to meetings and doesn't appear very organized and stuff. And then suddenly and the same thing in the MBO, he kind of put his lawyer hat back on, and next thing he's like ringing you about, paragraph 3.72 and explaining this thing to you. It's like, where did this level of detail come from? Because I haven't seen this from you in the last 10 years. And suddenly, you turn back into a lawyer, Matt. It's actually really helpful. So it's delighted, but this is not the Matt we are used to dealing with.
Yeah.
So, so look, I think we had a really good deal team to kind of work through that. And it was just like Grant Samuel said, there was, you had to work in the way that the potential buyers wanted to work, because this was kind of what they did day in and day out.
Yeah. It's the whole behave congruently with what their expectations are, and be aware that you're dealing with a professional M&A team who do this all day, every day, who kind of are there to do the deal as well. And so, don't be weird, don't be random, get this good advice is what we're kind of circling around here.
Yeah, and I think it was actually, because we hadn't made a conscious decision to go and sell the business, we suddenly flipped into this mode, right, where we were presenting to people about the business, how we strategically positioned it, what it did. And that was a really rewarding thing to go and do. So we spent lots of our time focused on the issues that the business had, or the challenges we were trying to overcome, or the day-to-day, how we kept things running. And it was a refreshing thing to go sit in a room of people, tell them about what you'd built, the kind of customers you worked with. And these guys were like salivating at the mouth going, love this. This is fantastic. We absolutely want this. Wish we could do this ourselves, kind of thing. So it was actually, I'd encourage people to do it more. It was really nice to just sit and, share and kind of celebrate the positive bits of the business that you built, because it wasn't something we spend a lot of time on.
Yeah. It's the bit of an entrepreneurial challenge, I find, actually, is that we're so focused on next quarter, next year, the BHAG, achieving those things, which are all kind of frontwards in orientation, that frequently we forget to look in the rear vision mirror It's actually one of the things that I find quite helpful about an effective board is to kind of go reflect on the journey that we've had, look at all the changes that we've made. Some of these things have created growing pains and there's some issues that we're facing, absolutely. And we're talking about risks and there's 25, 35, 105 things on the risk register, which sounds a bit overbearing sometimes, but look at where we've been. So that's a cool thing to be able to reflect on that journey. So the scale of the business at this stage, and you've talked that you can't share the commercial aspects of the deal, but the scale of the business, you're 120, 130 odd staff. So
Yeah, we were doing about, I think that year we're doing 27, 28 million or something in revenue. And the business on a trajectory to hit 30 the following year, I think.
Yep.
And, we were doing some very big deals in New Zealand.
Yes.
Across the utility sector, insurance, banking, as these, and public sector, as, people went from buying Salesforce as kind of a vertical kind of solution. They would buy, and so, because at this stage, Salesforce is kind of into industries. And so they'd be very much looking and buying a vertical solution. And they were very quickly figuring out it was a horizontal platform. And they were like, okay, so now we're looking at how we use this as a horizontal platform. And so, there was just more and more opportunities and work for us around that space.
Mm. Now, the deal that you did with Dentsu involved a relatively long earnout, which then kind of didn't go according to plan. So tell us about that.
So the deal we did with Dentsu, I think the deal took quite a long time. And so Dentsu pitched that as a 5-year earnout. But by the time we actually did the deal, it was kind of 4.5. And so, and the first piece of that was effectively 6 months away. So I think that, I think there were 3 earnout payments. There was, the first one was a kind of 6 months away. We had complete visibility as to what that was. So as much as that wasn't an upfront payment, I don't think there was any kind of doubt in that kind of things. And I think the reason, I don't know if that was Dentsu's standard formula. I suspect it probably was. But one of the reasons why that worked quite well for us also is that we were trying to grow a business in Australia, and they were trying to reward us for growing their business in Australia, and we're going to need some time to go and do that. And of course, COVID changed that. But that, I think, was, kind of part of the driving forces behind that. And I think that, I think the other interesting thing out of that, which we didn't really buy into, luckily, but, that's a great M&A pitch, right? That says, well, we're going to do an earnout and there's going to be these synergies, back to my favorite consulting word, look at all these things we can do together that you guys couldn't do on your own. And, we're going to have these customers, and we were a little bit like, well, I'm going to discard that because, who knows kind of thing. It was a good thing to discard because we really found that Dentsu in New Zealand didn't have any enterprise customers that were the kind of customers we wanted to work with. And so there weren't really any synergies that were going to come to the table. It helped their business case. Like, I know it was in their spreadsheet as to how they made it work. But I think it was good of us to kind of be cynical about how we were going to go and achieve that earnout and where that was really going to come from. And then, and so I think we went and had a careful look at that model and said, well, what do we realistically think we could go and do here? And so what do we think that enterprise value will turn out to be? And probably convinced ourselves that, we can, this will kind of work. And if we took a conservative kind of view of how the business would perform, that we should be able to go and hit those targets, and that wouldn't be a problem. So I think, that's a little bit how the deal was structured, and our kind of level of confidence when we looked at it and how we interpret it, not what they were selling to us, about what we thought would kind of come out of that. And then I think that, we had some ups and downs through that earnout. And I think a lot of that comes back to, there was, I think the core principle of any earnout is that business has to operate independently in order to be able to go and achieve the things that you're effectively still getting rewarded for. And there were stakeholder changes that people who came in who weren't involved in the deal, who kind of had different interpretations of that. And I think also, it's a good reminder, right, that in any kind of global company, there's lots of agendas and everyone's got their own agenda. And so I think we ended up in a situation where the intent of the earnout and what both parties agreed in a handshake at the front, if you like, outside of what was written in the contract, I think we were very clear on, and I think that's where we got to in the end. I think there was some ups and downs on the journey on the way between those kind of points. And so, we had some different stakeholders in the middle of that. We had COVID, so we suddenly couldn't grow a business. We had a team in Australia. We couldn't visit them. It looked like we had no idea how long that was going to go on for. So we made a decision to effectively integrate that team in Australia into their Australian business and effectively agreed a settlement on our Australian component of our earnout, because we thought that was best for the people and just kind of get back to what we were kind of focused on. And that was a really easy kind of I wouldn't even call it a negotiation. It was kind of a discussion. Both parties saw the value in that. We agreed on a number really quickly. It was just it was quite straightforward. And then I think also we had great kind of global support, if you like. But there were a couple of big issues that we struck where we kind of called on that global support. And the guys were like, well, we're kind of fighting our own battles at the moment. And I don't really want to waste my political capital on a small deal in New Zealand. It doesn't really matter to me. And so we'll kind of offer you this much support, but that's kind of all we can offer. And so I think that's also just the reality of dealing with a global company. And so, I think in hindsight, would we do it again? Probably. I think in reality, it was, like I said, we certainly at the end, I think everyone could say, yeah, that was kind of the handshake of what we agreed and how it worked. We got a great outcome from it, but it had some challenges on the way through. And I'm not sure, I don't think Neil would tell you could kind of contract your way out of those challenges anyway. And you just have to accept some of that stuff's at risk. And that's how it works.
You didn't, in the end, complete the duration of the...
No, that's right.
Yeah. What happened?
So again, there were some stakeholder changes.
Right. Okay. So that's a new at that point.
Yeah. And so, a new guy suddenly arrived on the scene and he's like, well, actually, I want to integrate these businesses and these earnouts are getting in the way. And so I want to settle these earnouts. And so...
So you essentially retraded on those points, negotiated.
So he came back and said, well, let's have a conversation about how we settle this earnout. And, Matt had built a great relationship with them. And it was really easy.
Okay, cool. Right.
So
advance the checks, probably a slightly smaller check, and off we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
So
when did you officially finish your employment piece of that earnout?
I finished, there was no requirement under the contract for us to stay as employees.
Ah.
So we signed that deal in the middle of 2019. So, 7 months before COVID.
Yes.
I stayed on for effectively to the end of 2021. So we'd found, basically at the time we were doing the deal, we'd been introduced to John Bessie, who we effectively brought into the loop and hired, because we were kind of only weeks away from telling staff at that point, And so we said to John, well, come in and as a chief customer officer, take over the sales and marketing function for a year and then become the CEO, and I'll step out of the CEO role. And so that's basically what we did, is that I spent a year continuing as CEO and then effectively handed over to John, kind of floated around. And then at the end of 21, I exited as an employee, and Rob and I both left then, and I think Matt left a few months later.
Yeah.
And that was a plan, when we started talking to all those parties, and being Denzu being one of them, we were already working 4 days a week. We had a plan to go to 3. We were putting this team in place that were going to run the business without us, and they were quite accepting of all of that. They were like, yeah, that's fine. It's like, we're not going to tie you in as such to the business as long as the business performs, and this is what the milestones are, and this is how the deal will kind of work. And so, I left at the end of 2021, and I'm trying to think. I think when we finally settled that earnout was probably start of 2023 or something like that.
Okay. Yeah. And so COVID was in the middle there. Have you gone off and done another venture? Have you taken time out? Are you painting?
Probably a little. I haven't done the other ventures.
Yeah.
I think a bit of all of the above. So the first year I did quite a lot of kind of consulting work for some clients, certainly for kind of 6 to 8 months of that year. And that was kind of the end of COVID, right? We weren't kind of locked down, but we're still in kind of restrictions start of 2022. And then every year's kind of been a bit different. So, I don't kind of, it's been an interesting kind of process, I would say. An interesting process, to figure out, well, would I go do something again? And actually, what would be the motivation to go and do that again? And so I think I wouldn't do professional service. And sometimes it's taken me a while to learn some of those things. We've kind of explored things down quite a lot of detail and then kind of gone and said, well, hang on, I don't really feel excited about that. And so I think, we kind of achieved everything we wanted to in a professional services sense. And so I kind of feel that's done and dusted. I wouldn't go back and do a professional services business because there's nothing personally to kind of go and achieve. And I've looked at some other stuff that's got to a stage where it doesn't really sound very interesting.
Yeah.
And so I'm still kind of taking it kind of year by year.
Cool. Good on you.
Yes. And I'm doing a bit of consulting at the moment. It's kind of keeping my brain engaged, but I might do something again. I think that I'm conscious that to go and do another venture, to make a venture successful, regardless of what it is, you kind of have to be in 150%.
Oh, it's intense, man.
So-
You have 60 plus hours a week for the first 3 to 5 years.
So
And anyone who says otherwise is not going to build a great business.
yeah, so you've got to be prepared to go and do that. And so
Agent stage,
at the moment,
do it
that's not-
again.
I'm not in the headspace to go and commit to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. The episode that dropped today actually is me experimenting with a new format, which is talking head format. So me talking to a camera, short entrepreneurial lessons, and I lead out with a big story, which is the Ambit story. So I've done well from exiting my first venture and invested sensibly and very well timed a number of different investments. And so wealth situation was sorted, high monthly income from my assets that was coming through the door. And so kicked Ambit off with a very clear idea of where it was that we were going, and then got to a certain point, year 3, and all of the intentions that I had from the outset, I had forgotten about. I was traveling prolifically, done in 1 year, I think 4 trips to the States, 2 to Europe, maybe 8 to Australia. So I was basically just living on an aircraft, and that's super glamorous. Never, right? You're traveling at the back of the aircraft, you're staying in cheap hotels, you're a startup, it's just bloody awful. And so I got to the certain point of time and I was just like, what the hell am I doing? I don't need to do this for the money anymore. And I'd forgotten all these different reasons, but the being intentioned about it and finding purpose from that thing is the thing that I think for a lot of us that have the great positive outcome of getting a great exit, it's important to do that. Otherwise you end up being stuck like I was. And that's a really critical lesson. So if you want to have that conversation anytime at any stage, more than happy to have that conversation.
Thank you.
So is there anything that we haven't touched on either through the MBO, the builds, the exit journey that might be kind of some gems of wisdom that you accumulated through those processes?
I think that's kind of the mechanics of the journey, if you like, through the different kind of change of ownerships and et cetera. I think that, the journey of kind of building I felt that we built a tier 1 kind of consulting business without a kind of tier 1 brand. And I think that was kind of quite unique. I think, and again, I don't know that you could have done that in many markets. So there was a New Zealand thing to that, but that was quite an achievement. And it's interesting, I was on the ferry this morning with an ex-employee who I kind of said hi to, and people still talk very fondly about Davanti and their time at Davanti. And she says, she gets customers that kind of go and say, oh, you worked at Davanti, or, how's Justin and Rob going? Or, and so I get a great deal of satisfaction kind of out of that. And the kind of projects that we were winning and the relationships and people that we kind of either employed and had as part of that team, but as also as customers, and that we worked on a long time. And so I'm working with some of those people now. And so I took a lot of, outside of the kind of financial metrics of the business, if you like, a lot of satisfaction with the relationships that you built and the people that became part of that team. A lot of people there for a long time. We never really hired kind of career consultants. Our people looked quite different. And so we were quite conscious that some of them would come in for a couple of years and kind of leave again. But, and that was kind of part of their journey. But everyone, or most people, talk very fondly about their kind of time and experience through that. And I think the kind of quality, if you like, and scale of the projects that we won and delivered, I'm also kind of very proud of. And I'm working with a client at the moment that's dealing with a professional services kind of company, trying to deliver a project. And it seems like the industry hasn't learned any lessons in 20 years. It's like, some of these things are quite fundamental, right? And yet some of those basics still kind of go wrong. And so I think, part of our success came back to not just building a business of scale, but actually the quality of what we delivered, how we fronted up to customers, the fact that we took a long-term, any customer relationship, we had a long-term kind of attitude to. And it was, you sit there with Denzo in the deal and they say, well, how much do you write off in terms of projects? Like, we don't write off anything. We bill everything. It's like, well, you must be writing something off somewhere. It's like, well, actually, that's not, we're careful about what we commit to. We'll go in and fix things if we get them wrong, but we've never had a customer come back and say, we're not paying the invoice. And so I think the way we did business, was a massive strength of that business. And it's been cool to see some of those employees go on to great things, either in the entrepreneurial world or in big corporates and other bits and pieces.
Yes.
Which is cool to be part of their journey.
Well, there's nothing more satisfying. We talked off camera about the importance, if you're a entrepreneur, so someone who wants to get a business out of the ground, the vital importance of working alongside an entrepreneur at some stage in your career, preferably at the start of your career. You worked for Brian Peace. I worked for John Lacey and Tony Falkenstein and a couple of folk in the UK. In fact, my first 10 years of my career were just working for entrepreneurs. And so getting exposure to you and your two co-founders, seeing what that journey was like, that would have been invaluable to them. And they've gone out in the consulting space, I think, and built these really cool brands.
Yeah, whole range of stuff.
Yeah.
And so
That's really gratifying.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that we taught them all those skills, but I thought they're part of that experience as part of their learning. And I think there's a bunch of people also that probably opened their eyes to different career opportunities for them, and have gone on to actually decide they're going to become Salesforce consultants or whatever else, that probably things they never considered before, which has been a cool part of that journey. And we had a lot of fun. I think that I think that was part of it. We wanted a business that people enjoyed being at. That we expected a lot. I'm someone that's has high expectations of others and of myself, and so and so we expected a lot of our people, but we wanted to make sure that we had fun on the way through, and we kind of celebrated those successes. And I think that applies in any kind of business. Doesn't matter if you're a services business or you've built a product, or all of our jobs are to how do you assemble a group of people that can help you get the outcome that you want. And so that are my happy memories around that.
I love it. So we're up to the stage of the conversation where it's the alternate universe. There's another Justin Hamilton, and he's got a different career. It's deeply satisfying to him. What was that career, Justin?
I'm not sure if it would be deeply satisfying. I guess I always daydream that maybe I'd be driving the Devonport ferry. So, I think the reality, when you look at that maybe the reality is a little bit different, particularly when you look at the weather this week. But that I think, that I'd have a lot of fun doing that. I'd happily go back and forth across the harbour.
I love it. Are you a boatie?
Yeah, I am a boatie. Yeah,
okay, right.
Definitely.
This is so funny. I am a Mark Twain fan,
right?
And I'm listening to one of his books, can't recall the title of it at the moment, and he's talking about his childhood along with two or three of his mates, fantasy of the career of choice, and it was the steamboatman. So it was the guy that was the captain of the steamboat. And so maybe you should go back and check this book out and see what it was and whether that's the same thing.
And I think, but I have a son that's about to finish a computer engineering degree at Auckland, and so in many ways, we kind of spent lots of time during that time in the business wondering where Salesforce was on the maturity curve, right? And when this machine that was kind of growing exponentially was going to kind of plateau, and had we reached that point, and what that meant for our business and how that would kind of work. And I kind of feel that if you look back, if I kind of think my career is kind of the last 25 years, probably a little bit more, how that maturity kind of works in the tech industry as well. And I think there was an underlying assumption that industry is maturing. It's not as dynamic as what it was. And having Braden go through university kind of, in a tech kind of field, and I guess with the rise of AI and kind of staying close to some of that, it's kind of refreshed my enthusiasm for the industry, right? So here we have an industry is probably just as dynamic as what it was 25 years ago. Yes, we've moved from, client server to cloud to SaaS to AI, but, it's not impacted. It's a weightless economy. It's not impacted by tariffs. It's a young man's game. You effectively can work anywhere in the world. There are still rare skill sets. It's pretty unique in that sense. And so, if there were ever times I was feeling a bit jaded that maybe it's going to change and it's going to become a bit more staid, I think that's kind of refreshed me to say, well, actually, it's just as good as it ever was. And, my wife was in the tech as well and in consulting, and we kind of met in that space. And we probably for that reason never really encouraged either of our kids to kind of go into tech. They kind of saw the benefits of it, and, they grew up through the Davanti years. Braden, I think, was 4 when we started the business. And Isabel's now in London working in a tech company. She's kind of, didn't do that in New Zealand, kind of got to London, saw the light, and she's like, oh, it's so good, isn't it? It's like, yeah, well, we kind of told you these things.
So your mum and dad, we don't listen to you.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, when you think about New Zealand, I think, and the opportunities for people, or when you're trying to build a career, I think it's an awesome space to be in. It's like,
totally.
And the opportunities and more than just high paid salaries, but what you can do and how critical it is across all industries now is it just goes from strength to strength. So that probably will stop me from driving the ferry.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. I get it. Looping back around again, Serge Van Dam posted something about the decline of people going into tech, the careers at the moment at university level. And he provocatively called out parents as being the issue. And so I went in with some comments, and then Michelle Dickinson, aka Nano Girl, she jumps in there, and then she goes in deep into the data and pulls the data apart and finds that he's misquoting numbers, and so there's this big shit fight going on in LinkedIn at the moment. It's quite funny to take a look at the comments. But anyway, Justin, what a great conversation. Thank you for digging into the memory bank and preparing for this conversation. I love the angles that we touched on around how you got into being a owner of a company, the unique angle there, and also the journey around navigating that sale process and the back end of it. So thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
What a pleasure. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Your ears are really important to me. If you haven't already, why not check out joshcomrie.com. There's a bunch of free resources on there, a downloadable chapter of my upcoming book, 2 commas, a diagnostic to help you understand where your business may be at in relation to your exit journey. And why not feel free to drop me an email with any feedback that you could have. The only way I and any of us can improve is through feedback. Thanks again for listening.